he asked me, do you think all Republicans are racist?
Hmm.
And without even really missing a beat, I said, and my brain literally broke.
Hmm.
And I couldn't think my way out of it. I couldn't come up with an answer. I couldn't figure out a way that it could be true that these agencies actually truly care about my health and are not captured by industry and aren't doing what, the people with the most money want and are doing what is best for our health.
How did you get in through the Democratic Party into the government? What did you do there? And then kind of that moment where you started to see things a little differently.
Sure. So
Welcome to Stay in the Fray podcast. I'm your host, Ryan. This is where headlines get hit hard, hypocrisy gets shredded, and the absurd are laughed at. If you want comfort, this isn't your place. If you want blunt and unfiltered, I'm your guy. Join me in the fray.
All you gotta do is just listen up.
Okay, hey guys. Excited to have a guest here with us today. For this episode, my guest did something that not a lot of people do in politics once they've kind of implanted themselves, which is she changed her mind. This is Lisa Ekman. She spent years inside the Democratic machine on Capitol Hill. She watched this shift that's happening in real time, and then she eventually walked away from it. So, and then she wrote a book, by the way. Lisa, thank you so much. I'm looking forward to this conversation. I've been waiting all week for it. So how are you?
I am doing great, thank you.
Good.
It is a pleasure to be here, and I appreciate you taking the time to have a conversation with me.
Of course. Right off the bat, the book is called, I'll say it 16 times for you, Deprogramming Democrats and Uneducating the Elites, correct?
That is,
And I'll have all the links out everywhere, but we'll get to that. We'll get to that. Let's get this out of the way. Tell me about how you got to Capitol. How did you get in through the Democratic Party into the government? What did you do there? And then kind of that moment where you started to see things a little differently.
sure. So I'll do this briefly because I think there's a lot we can dig into.
Absolutely.
I spent more than 20 years in Washington, D.C. As a Democratic advocate and lobbyist focusing on disability policy. I worked to make the federal programs and federal laws more supportive of people with disabilities, which meant I was nonpartisan ostensibly, but we worked mostly with the Democrats because we were about growing programs. We were about spending more money on things, and that makes you more likely to succeed working with Democrats as the way things are now. And so I arrived in Washington, D.C. at the very tail end of the Clinton administration. I was fresh out of my master's in social work, and I got nominated for a program called the Presidential Management Internship Program, which was created by Jimmy Carter in the 1970s to draw people with graduate level education into federal service. It was his idea on how am I going to attract and train the managers for for our federal bureaucracy. So the dean of my school nominated me, and I went straight to work for an appointee of at the Social Security Administration of Bill Clinton. So a political appointment, went straight to work for her. While I was in that program, I also got detailed to the United States Senate and worked for actually three different senators, including one that pretty much everyone has heard of, Senator Ted Kennedy of Massachusetts. He was one of what we call the disability champions in the Senate. And so I went and did a detail there with him. I also worked for Tom Harkin of Iowa for a little while. And then during the rest of my time there, I ended up working for a variety of nonprofits, as well as government contractors implementing federal programs. And in the middle of that time, I went to law school. And I went to Georgetown, which was a fascinating experience. And I was also the president of the Law Democrats at Georgetown. So during that time, also, while I was in law school, volunteered at the headquarters in Chicago for President Obama's first term doing disability outreach, voter outreach. And then worked throughout the rest of up until the event that changed the world, COVID. I worked at a variety of federal, sorry, nonprofits, as well as I said, government contractors. And the very last nonprofit I worked for had a small political action committee attached to it. So I also I administered that, which meant I got to see a little bit on the money side of the
Right,
equation as
right.
well. So I kind of got to see DC in all its glory, good, bad, and ugly. And I usually emphasize a focus on those last two, bad and ugly. But yeah, so I it was COVID that sort of helped bring me out of my stupor. But there was something that happened a few years before COVID. A few things.
Yeah,
The
let's
first
jump into
thing
that. Let's see where the shift happened here.
Yeah, so the first thing that happened is that even before, way before COVID, I started to notice the change that was happening within our country, and within politics. And it used to be, when I first got detailed to the Hill, um, senators of the different parties used to have dinner together all the time. There were outings and things like that. And even one of the senators I worked for, he was part of a bipartisan a cappella singing group that would, sort of exemplify sort of you're an American, I'm an American, and we're going to work together to try to improve our country. And I felt like the conversations we had on the Hill, especially prior to 9/11, I do think 9/11 shifted a lot of things. And we'll probably get into that a little bit later. But I used to believe that we could get a whole bunch of different people with really different views in a room together, and it felt like we were having, rational, reasoned conversations where we all wanted to see our country improve. We disagreed about how that might happen, but we all were working in good faith towards a compromise that would leave us all not fully satisfied, but believing that we got something to incrementally improve the country. And I saw that start to change, over the years that I was there. And I saw so much more sort of antagonism about people who didn't think like we did or across the aisle. And I started to hear a lot more things like, well, that might be a really good idea, but I don't think the optics of it would be very good, or I don't think the donors would like that, or I
When
don't think
when
that.
did you? I don't mean to interrupt you. When did you start to kind of see this? I mean, because
Um,
I only am aware, maybe the last 10 years or so. But you're saying it might have been before.
it was a little bit before that. I think that social media, the advent of social media did play a role in it. But I really think that it was during President Obama's term.
Hmm.
And I think that there was a lot of divisive rhetoric that was being used, and sort of a stoking of the division. You'll hear a lot of people of my generation say this. For example, I am not saying there is not racism. I'm not saying that discrimination doesn't occur. But it felt like in the 80s and the 90s, it wasn't that we were colorblind. We saw we were different colors. We just didn't care. If you were a good person and you were fun to hang out with, we hung out. And it wasn't that big of a thing. But I feel like early 2000s with social media, it started to creep back in. And then with Obama, it really started to heat up that rhetoric around dividing us by race. And then we saw how that's developed later on. Um,
Well, I continue to get torched whenever I talk about Obama being the true beginning of the division, the way that we handle division in this country because of identity politics, and because of this idea of being a victim. And I feel like he preached that, and to point fingers instead of taking accountability or having accountability. And so I agree 100%. And so it's interesting to hear somebody that kind of lived through it as a Democrat see the same thing. And
I
again, I'm called all sorts of horrible things. I'm this all the buzzwords because I critique or criticize Obama and his policies. So anyway, I just wanted to.
Well, yeah, and Ryan, that's fair. And as we get further on, I will talk about why I think that happens so much and
Mm.
why Democrats respond with that sort of visceral anger when you point something like that out. And there's a reason, and you shouldn't look at it, don't take it personally and shouldn't look at it badly. I didn't think
I
you
view it as
did.
desperation on their part, and maybe I go a little too extreme with, you're just desperate. So I have to work on toning myself down as well sometimes.
Which is fair. I think that something else happened that started before Obama, but really geared up during Obama, and that was the push to get everybody to go to college. And
Mm.
the critical theory, the critical race theory, the uh, and the divisiveness that that brings, the um, victimhood mentality, the lack of accountability that goes along with the idea that you're oppressed and no matter what you do, you'll never succeed because and you're an oppressor, Ryan, because of the
Hmm.
color of your skin, um, also got geared up during Obama's term. It was everybody go to college. And now what we see I was just reading an article about this today, is just a glut of college educated people with absolutely no job skills really that fit the current environment. And we see an unemployment rate of just under 10% for young college
Is it?
educated
Wow.
people. 9.2, yeah. I
For
guess it's a
college
little bit,
educated.
but yeah, so
Goodness.
and that's only going to get worse, and we can talk about that a little bit later because I think
Yeah.
that is fueling a lot of the issues, both on what I will call the brainwashed left and the brainwashed right. So and I should say that, I don't believe that deprogramming is necessary only on the left.
Right.
The reason why I say deprogramming Democrats is because that's my experience and that's what I
Right.
can speak to. I sort of reject the division that they have us under of left and right. And we can talk about that more, but let's finish the setup and then we'll circle
Sure.
back. Because it's easy for me to get distracted too. But so
I
we
have 16
so
things I want to ask, and I'm trying to like keep it all in mind. But go ahead. This is great.
yeah, so I think that was part of it. So part of me was starting to become really disillusioned about my ability to make a difference. The other thing that happened along those lines during that time was the passage or the Supreme Court decision in Citizens United, and money just started flooding into DC.
Mhm.
Um, It may not surprise you, or it might, I don't know, but in 2024, $4.6 billion was spent on lobbying, and that's with a B. Um, and that's the money that the average voter is competing with in order for someone in Washington to hear them, to hear their concerns, to be responsive to. And that is, just a fraction of the $20 billion spent on the federal elections last year.
Right.
And so when you start thinking of it that way, it's not surprising I heard, well, that's not going to play well at midterms, so we're not going to support that, or we can't give the other side a win because that won't play well in the election, or those kind of things. And Citizens United was 2010. It was right around the same time that Obama, was picking up steam and
Right.
Obamacare got passed and all of that. So and in the meantime, we're recovering from, the market crash and everything else is going on. People are struggling, and then always when you struggle, you look for someone to blame. And when the rhetoric heats up, and is divisive, it gives you that other to blame.
Hmm.
So all of that sort of was a stew, I think, that sort of created that environment. And for me, I went to Washington, D.C. because I wanted to make our country better. I wanted to, as a younger person, I would have laughed at the idea that I would go work for the government. I'm not going to go work for the man, I'm not going to go do
Right.
that. But that's exactly what I did because I thought I could actually make a difference. But as I started to see the new environment and how much money was playing a role in politics and how tribal things were starting to become, I became less and less optimistic that I was going to be able to make a difference. And for me, I gave up of having a family that wasn't in my, I have no children of my own. And so I poured everything into, my career and trying to make a difference. And that's where I was getting my meaning and my identity. And so as I started to see, hey, I'm not really making a difference, I started to become kind of disillusioned. At the same time, I unfortunately lost both of my parents within 2 years to illness. My dad in 2014 and my mom in 2016. And it gave me a lot of exposure to what I like to call the sick care system in our country.
Mm.
And in particular, with my mother, so my dad had a back issue. He had surgery for it and then had just like a catastrophic complications to that surgery that left him functionally quadriplegic with adrenal failure. And so he needed 24-hour care, he needed help with everything. And my mom, who already had multiple sclerosis, became his primary caregiver. And he lived 5.5 years after that surgery, and every day was a struggle. He fought for every day. He was really happy to be here, but it was a really hard time for both of my parents. And the toll of taking care of him, the financial stress, all the anxiety, the fact that she was already immunocompromised, led to my mom being diagnosed with stage 4 of an extremely aggressive cancer.
Oh, no.
Um, yeah, in 2013. And she got the "you may want to get your affairs in order" speech. You may have, a few months to live. And so she said, "Lisa, I'm going to do conventional treatment, but I'll do anything else that will help improve my odds. Will you research it for me?" And so I said, "Sure." And I worked, part of my work around disability policy involved healthcare and it involved health research. And so I was like, "Sure, I'll look into it." And I did. And, I found things that made me extremely optimistic for her, but also started to really make me question some of the regulatory agencies that are in charge of our so-called healthcare system. I found two books that were amazing. One focused on nutrition and its role in helping someone beat cancer. And the other one also looked at nutrition, but really focused in on sort of the mental and spiritual and emotional aspects of what causes cancer and what also can help you beat it. And so, we got my mom to a naturopath. She had surgery and she started chemo, a round of chemo of 6 treatments. And we got her to a naturopath. We changed her diet, everything she put in on her body, cleaned her home with. And then we worked on her stress reactions. We did guided meditation. We did focused breathing. We did all sorts of things like that. And after the third chemo treatment in that first round, she had a battery of tests and she was cancer free. There was no evidence of cancer in her body anymore. And her doctor was amazed and astounded and couldn't believe it. What a miracle. And, even though he said at one point when I tried to bring her organic food into the hospital while she was having a blood issue dealt with, that he didn't think it mattered what she ate. And that was just sort of what, was shocking to me.
Yeah.
The one thing he did say that I thought was really somewhat astute is her attitude about what's going to happen matters a lot. And I think that's 100% true. But that's a story for a different day. But so she finished those 6 chemo treatment, the round, and she was cancer free for 2 years, completely cancer free. And we got to take her all over the place, and she got to do a lot of things that, she had on her bucket list. And then a tiny little growth appeared where the original tumor was. And her doctor recommended chemotherapy again. And she had one chemotherapy treatment and it fried her kidneys and she died of kidney failure.
Oh, no.
Um, yeah, thank you. It was very hard, Ryan. But the reason I tell this story is that it really did create a lot of cracks in the dam that held the flood of truth back from me about the government in which I had placed so much of my faith and so much of my trust, and the agencies that I did as well. It made me think, what in the heck is the USDA doing? That food pyramid doesn't at all resemble what all the science says about nutrition, that I've just read. And what in the world is going on with cancer treatment? Chemotherapy hasn't really improved in 50 years. And it's basically, let's throw all this poison at someone who's already struggling and hope that we kill the cancer cells, but not too many of the healthy cells around it. So so that sort of started to create some cracks. But at the same time, I had to go back to DC and I was working with those very same agencies and the people there. And so I kind of had to pigeonhole that. I kind of had to put that aside so that I could go back to work. Now, that was in 2016. So flash forward a few years. Donald Trump gets elected. I think the world is over. I think, he's going to destroy our
So
country.
you
I
were on
think
that. You were on that team. You were on
Oh,
that
I
immediate. Yep.
had full scale TDS. I had
Okay.
full scale, everything the media told me about him, I
Mhm.
believed. I didn't double check it. I never went back and watched the full speech to see, did he actually say that or is that out of context? All the
Right.
things. And I literally cried on election night. I'm not joking. There were tears just flowing, and oh my God, what's going to happen to women's rights? What's going to happen to, all the vulnerable people, just like every good progressive member of the cult would do. And
Right.
so I did. And I proceeded to spend the next 3 years fighting everything that he did. At the same time, as I had mentioned, I was really growing disillusioned with doing this work at all. I kind of joke that, as I started to go to meetings on the Hill, I no longer took notes of the meetings. I just made check marks every time I felt I was being lied to.
Right.
And, that's how I would judge the meeting. Like it was that 10, wow, that was a 15 bagger, pretty good one, kind of thing.
See
And
if we
so
can get to 20 next time.
yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And I would often, put stars next to it if it was like the chief of staff lying to me
Mm.
instead of the policy person or whatever. But
Yeah.
the yeah, so
Bottom
I
line is you weren't doing what you wanted to be doing, which is actually taking notes and helping and doing. Yeah.
exactly, and I could almost to a T tell you what was going to happen in every meeting that I went to,
Yeah.
depending on who I was meeting with, what party they were, and how high up in the leadership they actually were. And so, or the pecking order. Sometimes it's leadership, sometimes it was just a brand new congressperson, and they had a brand new um, person working on an issue. And most of that time I spent trying to educate them about the issue, or that kind of thing. But so in October of 2019, I scheduled my retirement for March 31st of 2020.
Oh goodness. So you were right on the COVID,
We
the
were
COVID.
just
Yeah.
just finishing up 2 weeks to
Yeah.
flatten the curve. And so yeah, I like to
But
believe
what
that
was so you had just lost interest, like you had said, because you felt all of these things were happening, and you were just going to be out. I'm done. I'm just going to retire. Like that was the mindset.
that was
Or
the mindset. And I actually had gotten into a new relationship that I started in February of 2019. And um I just couldn't foresee myself continuing to do what I was doing just for the sake of money,
yeah,
and that was really what
right,
it was at that point. It was really kind of appealing. I used to say that I get paid the medium bucks because I wasn't, making the big
right,
bucks, but and they had an attractive, match to the retirement thing, and so I could have tried to write it out, but
right.
um, I needed something more meaningful. And I didn't know what I was going to do next at that point. And I had been talking about trying to find something new, but I had sort of really gotten pigeonholed into a very specific set of skills. And, there were times where I was offered significantly more money to lobby for, say, healthcare facilities or do other kinds of consulting. And it just wasn't appealing to me because for me, the whole point of doing the work was to improve the world, to make our country a better place. And so when I felt like I couldn't really do that anymore, I decided to retire and take a little time to figure out what came next.
Were you still? I mean, there's no other way to say it. Filled with TDS, anti-Trump. when you left, or had you kind of just I guess I missed the part. Or were you being kind of open to this idea that maybe? And look, we all get it. He's not always the most likable personality. I get it, but just from a political standpoint, all the things that you were being told, did that contribute to you being okay? I'm done because I'm seeing through this.
No,
You're
not,
still.
I
You were
mean,
still. You were
I was
still.
still,
Okay.
yeah, and I'll relay the story I had with my boyfriend, who is my partner, and he'll become big in a few minutes in the story too.
Okay.
But prior to us getting together when we were just friends, we were having some conversations, and he asked me, do you think all Republicans are racist?
Hmm.
And without even really missing a beat, I said, well, I guess you'd have to be at least a little bit,
Hmm.
because it's so ingrained and programmed into Democrats' heads that Republicans are racist. Their policies are racist. All of them are racist. If you vote for someone who's going to try to put in place the policies of the Republican Party, then you must be
You must.
racist. You must
Yeah.
not care. And this we'll get into a lot. You must not care about Black people. You must not care about trans kids. You must not care about the people that we had been programmed to believe the Republicans were going to hurt. So I hadn't seen through the veil at all at in October of 2019. I was just done playing the Washington game,
Yeah.
and it gets old at a point, because you're never really sure if you have actual friendships, because unless it's completely away from work, people who don't do anything related to politics, because people are always looking at what can you do for me, who can you introduce me to, kind of thing, as opposed to just, hey, I think you're a really interesting person. I'd like to, have a drink with you and spend some time, or we have a hobby in common or whatever. So I was just done with that. And oddly enough, two things I had kind of toyed with were teaching, um, and writing a book. So
Writing a
turns
book.
out that came to be a little bit later in the game. But yeah, so flash forward now to COVID, and so I was still completely under the spell, and I bought everything that they were saying, and I was afraid. I bought some masks, which I will say I barely ever wore, only maybe once or twice, because pretty soon I did wake up. And I didn't want to kill someone's grandma, and not even know that I was sick and pass it on to someone. So I was doing everything I could to kind of follow the rules and do what I was told, and just like you're supposed to, and trust the experts just like you're supposed to, and listen to what the government tells you. And My boyfriend, his name's Jamie, he was not. He was really questioning from the beginning, is this really as bad as they say it is? Should we just really be taking a different approach? And so, as you might imagine, he and I were verbally sparring about this a little bit, in what I would now call a mixed COVID household.
Yeah.
It's
And I'm
sort of,
sure there were a lot of those.
I'm sure there were,
Yeah.
and at some points it got particularly heated, and we were having a particularly heated conversation one day, and Jamie said to me, or I said to him, I said, Jamie, I just can't believe it. I can't believe these agencies that I've worked with for 20 years, the people in them that I've worked with all this time, would do this to us, would do this to the world without the data and the evidence to support what they're doing. And he just really calmly looked me in the eyes and he asked me a question. And he said, Lisa, if they'll poison our water, what won't they do? Now, I already knew this to be true because of the research I did for my mom, which is part of why I share that story. They put the fluoride in the water, it lowers IQ, it calcifies your pineal gland, it does all sorts of bad things, and there's all sorts of things in the water. Now, I knew it to be true, and I also know water is the most essential thing for us. If you don't get it, you're going to die in about 3 days if you have no fluids. And so, what it did is push the cognitive dissonance that I had been holding in my head And I believe everyone on the left has to, in order to believe the contradictory things that the experts tell them all the time. But it pushed mine to the point where my brain could no longer hold it. And I like to say my brain literally broke.
Hmm.
And I couldn't think my way out of it. I couldn't come up with an answer. I couldn't figure out a way that it could be true that these agencies actually truly care about my health and are not captured by industry and aren't doing what, the people with the most money want and are doing what is best for our health. And that they poison our water. I couldn't. And so then Jamie did something else that, was really key for me waking up. And that was the fact that all these people who were supposedly, on the right or independent thinkers were saying, do your own research. And at the same time, the Democrats were trying to censor. They were censoring people left and right and shutting down conversation and shutting down debate.
Zuckerberg admitted it.
Oh yeah, it's all, I mean, it's
You
all
know?
admitted, and I detail a lot of this in the book, with the
Mhm.
Twitter files and everything else. And the government was getting private industry to do through direct pressure coercion what the First Amendment prevents it from doing, basically, which the Supreme Court even has said, nope, can't do that. That still runs afoul of the Constitution. So what Jamie said is he's like, Lisa, if you don't believe me, prove me wrong. Go get the research. Show me how I'm wrong. And I think I screamed at him, fine, I will. And then what happened is I allowed myself to ask questions again. I allowed myself to do research with an open mind from sources beyond who were approved government credentialed sources. And as many in the truth community would say, I started going down rabbit hole after rabbit
Mhm.
hole, and
Mhm.
my life has never been the same. My entire reality collapsed. Everything I thought to be true, not true. Everyone I trusted could no longer be trusted, including myself, because I realized I had been indoctrinated and brainwashed through lies and propaganda, and that I had, through indoctrination in school, especially, sublimated my intuition to the point where my gut would tell me that can't be true. It must be wrong. But if an expert told me that it was true, I had to believe it. So, I went through what I now would term a dark night of the soul. All of, trying to rebuild my self-esteem, my identity, my, sense of self. And it was really, really, really challenging. But the conversation with Jamie and the censorship also reminded me that, I was in my heart a classical liberal, as they say,
Mhm.
meaning I believed in liberty and that I am a First Amendment absolutist. And what was happening around that time, with freedom of speech, but not just freedom of speech, because the First Amendment guarantees our freedom of assembly. It guarantees our freedom of association. So you can't go see grandma in the hospital who's sick, but you can have a huge protest,
Right, right.
if they agree with the reason you're protesting, right? And also our freedom to worship when and where we please. And all of these natural born, God-given rights enshrined in our First Amendment being eviscerated without so much as a conversation about, do we actually have to go this far? Do we have to do this? Is this justified by the data and the evidence that we have? And at the same time, you have tens of thousands of scientists and doctors and researchers who published the Great Barrington Declaration and sign it saying, yeah, we probably ought to just treat this like we have every other, infectious disease and take an approach that protects the vulnerable. And meanwhile, nobody is paying any attention to them in the government. And I always like to remind people that there is no public health emergency exception to our Constitution. In fact, there is no exception to our Constitution. And, um, but they controlled everyone the way that they always do, and that's with fear. And once you get someone afraid enough, they will do just about anything once you tell them that you can keep them safe. And that's what I think we saw happening during COVID. That's why, I'll go back to 9/11. That's why people were willing to look the other way when they completely gutted the Fourth Amendment with the Patriot Act and the Transportation Security Act after 9/11, is because they made people afraid enough that they were willing to give more power to the government to protect them. And I think that is a very clear distinction between what I see from people who are on the right or independent versus people who are Democrats, is that the ability to control them through fear is different. And I, in retrospect, put a lot of the blame is not the right word, but the reason, a big part of the reason for that, I believe, is that so few people on the left have any sort of spiritual or religious faith.
And I read that when reviewing the book. You put some emphasis on that as well. And I'll toss it out here. I'm my whole life have been back and forth when it comes to faith, and I've always believed in individual spirituality. I believe that you need to have, but you're right. The people that don't, and the times in my life where I kind of abandoned that notion, wrong word probably, but you do. I mean, you're able to be, you can get so scared and so worried about life. And I'm making this very generalized, but that you could fall prey to that. I mean, easily, and you didn't really have anything to kind of to lift you out of this whole the being scared to. You're basically giving your autonomy to somebody, if that makes any sense. I'm stumbling
No,
over the numbers, but
it totally does. So
yeah,
the way that
talk
I
more about
like,
the religion thing.
so I think that there is this natural desire among humans to feel connected to something bigger than themselves.
Mhm.
The world can be a very scary place if you are not. And when you have a connection to the creator, however you want to, envision that. I personally don't push anyone towards any particular, interpretation. And I myself have my own personal relationship with God. I don't go to church or any other formalized religion because I don't think that's necessary in order to be connected to the Creator. Um, I don't look negatively at anyone who does. And I highly think that the power of prayer in a group is very real. The energy, putting that energy together is very real. And the community that you can create through those institutions is amazing. On the other hand, I do also think that it has been used, often misused. Now we see all the money involved in religious institutions, but also has been used as a different mechanism of control throughout history as well. But and I'm not trying to get sidetracked into that, but the point being that people want to be connected to something real, and they also want to believe that there is some power, some good behind good, some power, that is going to make everything okay, and that if they don't have that through their own connection to God, they look somewhere else to place that.
There it
And
is.
they put it into government. And it's very clear that, if you go back to, I'm sure you've probably heard this quote from Karl Marx, that, religion is the opiate of the masses, right? And what he meant by that is that if people have religious faith, they will not be able to see how absolutely miserable they actually are. And therefore, they won't allow the government to take over control. And so, part of what I came to while I was researching for the book is that our country has been in a slow cultural revolution towards communism that began about the same time that the Cultural Revolution began in China. But because of our very strong constitution and our history of individualism, it's taken a lot longer to kind of break down those institutions. But what is very clear when you look at any sort of socialist or communist revolution throughout history, there are two institutions that have to be destroyed in order to get there. One is religion and faith, and the second is the family. And we have seen concerted attacks on both of those things in the US since I would say about the 1960s, around the same time that the Cultural Revolution started in China. They were already communists, by the way, at that time, but Mao, my understanding, I will say I am not a scholar in what happened in China, but my understanding is that he was fearing that people were beginning to reject the communism, and that is why he moved to destroy religion, destroy the family. And the other piece of that was creating chaos in the cities through his Red Guards, which was the youth who then created a lot of destruction in the cities, somewhat similar to what we have seen with Antifa and BLM and some of the other things going on in our country. So, I think that part of the other thing is that, most religions, beyond just giving you sort of, or if you have your own faith, beyond giving you a sense of connection, it gives you a sense of acceptance. It gives you a sense of that you're loved and you're enough. And I think we are in a situation in our society. I can't speak for cultures across the world because I don't live there, but where people feel very disconnected from one another, in my experience. There's very little sense of community. COVID really spiked that up because it forced us all online. And so now people's online lives are almost more real than their, life outside of the screen. And so many of the things that used to create a sense of community and sort of gave us the idea that we may, all work in different jobs and we may come from different backgrounds, but we're all Americans at our base and we can relate to one another. So many of those things have really disappeared, like I used to be in a bowling league many years ago, and I played competitive pool on a team, and I was in a dinner club, and a lot of people got a sense of community through church. You might not know how your neighbor voted, but you knew they brought the best salad to the church picnic,
Yeah.
right? And we don't see that anymore. And it becomes a lot easier to make someone else the responsible party for your problems when you don't interact in real life with anyone like that. And I think that's part of what we see all the time now.
I've always said I was independent, and because I liked the idea of having these conversations, and I don't have to have all of these. I don't have to believe all these things and hate all of these things. I can pick and choose based on the issue, and so. But what happened, in the last, not on quite the level of you, because you worked there and you were kind of invested in it more than I was. But just I started seeing that I wanted to go and have a beer with somebody and if I disagree with them, we could just kind of laugh it off and whatever. And then I lived up in a blue, I won't say exactly where, but it was a very, very north eastern blue state, blue city and town. And the things that were said to me, and it was right during the 2016 election. And I was shocked because I grew up in Texas, so I wasn't used to, having that quite that pushback. But I mean, I'd be at a bar and just having a beer and just trying to talk normally, and the vitriol, this just was spewed at me for possibly voting for Donald Trump. And it opened my eyes to this kind of this like something's not right here. Like I don't remember this happening during, Bush versus who, I don't remember this happening, and something's going on And so I looked into it more, and that's where, and again, this isn't about me, but that's why I connected with what you were saying when we spoke. Was I have found all these things out from different ways as well. I mean, you found it out your way, I'm finding it out my way, and I'm hoping that it's something that people are opening their eyes to, in the religion and I mean, look at New York City. That's exactly what I'm thinking of when you're talking about this. Everybody there is just feeding off of being taken care of, and there's a lot of the lack of the whole religious mixture and what's going on, and right now with Zoran Mamdani, and I'm worried that that's spreading. You see pockets of it here and there, and you see people that just turn their noses up to religion. You turn their noses up to this idea of family, and telling women that, angry that, heaven forbid, we suggest that a woman might want to stay home and be a mother and want to be a family. Not even that, just have a father present, how important that is. I can go off on all this, in the Black community and all these missing fathers, and we're just getting away from all of that. You're seeing a decline in everything.
No, we definitely are. And again, this is on purpose. I mean,
You think this is
I
organized?
100% believe it is. And it is been done through our universities in many ways. And it has also been done through the design of our welfare programs.
Yeah.
You will lose funding if you get married. That sends a very clear message. Have another kid, but
You
don't
get
dare
more.
have
You have
dad in the
another kid.
house.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I do think it was done on purpose. One thing I don't do in the book, and I don't really do, because I'm not trying to reprogram anyone, Ryan. I'm not trying to tell you who did it. I suggest everybody do their own research to figure out and come to their own conclusion about who exactly was doing it. But the Democratic Party and the leadership of it has been instrumental, I'll just say, in accomplishing some of these goals. But I definitely think that, there have been concerted effort to weaken the family, but even to go beyond that, to make it so that not only are there not gender roles, we can't even say what a gender is anymore. And we have a sitting Supreme Court justice who, during her confirmation hearing, declined to say what she thought a woman was because she's not a biologist. So and as a lawyer, that's ridiculous to me. There's women are a protected class according to the Supreme Court. And one of not to get too deep into like legal theory, but basically to be a protected class, there has to be definable visual ability to tell who is a member of that class.
Right.
And women have, they're not the most protected. It's a long story, but they are a protected class. But now a Supreme Court justice says, I can't tell you who's in that class. Well, that means you're about to try to destroy what that class is. Um, and I will say that I have recently, and I'm joking about this kind of, but I have burned my feminist card. Modern feminism is nothing like what we envisioned it to be. And it is responsible for, in large part, the fact that I chose not to have children. And like the 90% of women over 50 who chose not to have children who have been surveyed, I regret that choice. I can't go back and change it. And part of why I'm speaking is that I hope that young women who are now man-hating, angry, want to be a boss babe, worst thing that could ever happen to me is to get pregnant, may listen to me and hear my cautionary tale. One of the biggest things, getting back to the religion topic, is that, aside from wanting to be connected to something bigger, we're all looking for meaning and purpose, I think, in our life. And, having that connection to God can give that to you. But also, there's nothing that you could do, I don't think, as a human, meaningful or purposeful, than reproducing and raising the next generation of of children and raising responsible, compassionate, loving adults who will carry on our species into the future. And when I have conversations with young women, I say to them, do you really think anyone is going to remember what you do at work? Do you really think
Yeah.
10 or 15 years from now, there will be some women who invent something that, everyone will know about? It's a very small percentage. I most of the people at my old nonprofits probably don't even know who I am. And it's been 5 years, so the idea that you can erase the meaning of reproduction and what that does, in terms of giving purpose and meaning to your life and replace that with work is just it's not, I don't think it's very valid. But I think it's something that a lot of young women have been convinced of. I saw the saddest little video. It was a woman was on a campus interview, trying pro-life, trying to talk to young women about abortion. And this young woman, I would say probably 20, maybe 21 student looking, had said she had had an abortion and she didn't regret it. And if she got pregnant today, she would do it again.
Hmm.
And in fact, she was planning to go get herself sterilized very soon. And her friend came over and gave her a high five for it. And then she said, why in the world would I want to have kids on a dying planet? And that's sort of the
This notion of why would I want to bring kids into this world for X and Y and Z reasons? I mean, interrupt you.
No, yeah, but to me that is so very, very sad, and
Yeah.
it's one thing, I was always sort of the, abortion should be safe, legal, and rare, and we really ought to make sure people have supports that they need if they get pregnant and don't feel like they have the supports in order to have that child. We've gone so far from that. Young women use it as birth control,
Yeah.
basically, and I think that there is something chemically that happens to a woman when she becomes pregnant that doesn't just go away, with an abortion. But I also think there's a fair bit of misogyny within feminism these days.
Mhm.
The things that I would have said are characteristically female, nurturing, softness, kindness,
Right.
is now looked at as weakness and not female, and it's looked at as bad. It's actually hating those things that are sort of intrinsically, hormonally and biologically woman. And women, so many women just basically act more like men. They don't want to be women. And I think that is part of, what happened to me as well. And once I woke up from the stupor, I don't feel that way anymore.
Mhm.
But I think that going along with that, they've been pushing gender ideology to try to completely even destroy what it means to be a woman, as though the way we look on the outside, all that's all you got to do is, wear some makeup, put on a dress, and now you're a woman. I also think has some misogynistic things going on, but
Mhm.
I raise that because that is also part of destroying the nuclear family that goes along with the Cultural Revolution idea, and is also part of getting children to place their faith more in the institution of school and not in their parents. If they keep getting taught you could be any gender you want, if your parents tell you otherwise, they're wrong, and we're a safe place, and your parents may not be, and if you decide you want to transition, you can do it. We'll
And we're not even going
socially.
to tell them and have to.
Exactly, exactly.
Don't get me started. Oh my gosh, on that.
Yeah, there's a lot in my book about that too, because it
Yeah.
is it is something that is really pernicious. It's another one that just really, really opened my eyes to the fact that the Democrats are on the wrong side. If you think you can compel me to use speech that I believe is completely inaccurate, either for scientific or religious reasons or just because I don't want to. That's a problem. And there was I think it was a Washington Post, I can't remember for sure who did it, but it was some survey in 2023. And nearly half of Democrats between like the ages of 18 and 29 believed it should be a crime to misgender someone. So you could go to jail.
Yeah, I've heard that one too. Colorado, I think, had something along those lines. But I mean, seriously, yeah, this is. I mean, it's not about me, but real quick, I mentioned that I was independent, and my big issue right now is because of the things we're talking about, especially something like this. I mean, there's could open a scroll of just all the things that have pushed me away from being able to align with anything on the modern left. We keep using the word modern feminism, modern, and there's a truth to that. Yeah, this wasn't. Even I know, like I said, I was never a Democrat or I was fiscally Republican, that whole thing, socially this, fiscally that, and I never saw the Democratic Party and the way I see them now, and it's extreme, and I cannot align with it, and so it's these things that you're talking about right now with the gender and a crime to misgender somebody. I mean, this is insane. 0.06% of the country is causing the 9.4%. My math is how good it is. To cater to them, to alter their lifestyle, to all of a sudden worry about their young girls in the bathrooms, things like that. And we're called, everybody's called all these horrible things for questioning the issues that surround something like the transgender or the gender identity. And let's just talk about the bathrooms, or let's talk about sports. You do you. If you're an adult, you do you. Leave the kids out of it, and whatever. That doesn't make me this horrible person that people want to make me out to be. And so that's kind of what I was so intrigued by with you was, you were talking about that 3.5 year period, and then you lead up to where you finally retired. Were you seeing all of these things? And I think maybe I missed that. All of these types of extremisms from the left start to kind of like
I
increase. Does that
I
make sense?
was, yeah, I was, but I would say that I got out of it in 2020 just as it was
As it
really,
was really
really
turning.
getting really bad. So everyone else was putting their pronouns in their emails,
Yeah.
Luckily, the organization I work for didn't require us to do that.
Well, follow-up question. I was going to ask you, were you and anybody else, did anybody speak out, and were they, I mean, did you feel pressure to not say anything? Were people questioning this kind of game
Um,
plan?
it was weird because it happened sort of subtly, and then all of a sudden it was there. And, I was the
Were there
chair.
others like you though that were kind of like, this is a little extreme?
No, no.
Oh, wow.
Most everybody was just really going along with it.
Just
And
following
and
along.
they're yeah, because the peer pressure is intense. And it is there is this requirement for ideological conformity, that I talk about. And you had to just kind of go along, and it happens sort of incrementally. So you give an inch, and then you're all of a sudden you notice I'm 6 feet from where I was,
Yeah.
and I'm not comfortable here, but how do I say anything without being, shoved off the cliff that
That's
is
what I
in
was wondering.
between
Like,
the
how do
six
you,
feet?
you trapped?
And people didn't. I mean, I was being pushed. So I was the chair of the board of a large coalition of like 100 organizations, all focusing on disability. And we were being pushed to do more work around, as they call it, intersectionality, and around trans issues, and around race and things like
Yeah.
that. And I did push back, and probably slowed that down. But as soon as I retired, they went full in on it. And, I did some consulting work after the fact, attended that coalition's annual meeting, which was all done on Zoom. It was the weirdest thing ever, because all you saw were like 100 little black boxes
Yeah.
with names and pronouns, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
Um, and the entire agenda was about race and gender,
Hmm.
and not about disability. It was all about those things, which to me was very telling of what had happened in the interim. And I can guarantee you I would not have lasted long as the leader anymore of that coalition because I had pushed back about as much as I could.
So you tried a little bit to,
I tried a little bit, but I was on my way out, and
yeah.
so I didn't. I think part of what I talk about and what I learned as I was, going through writing the book is that there, the people on the left, and again, in part goes back to the lack of spiritual faith,
Mm,
rely a lot on external validation for their own sense of self and their
yeah.
self-esteem. And part of that, in part because I'll go back and blame social media, in part for this. Cancel culture started to happen, and people on the left, the loudest voices are the ones that are often the farthest out there,
Mhm.
right?
A
And
loud
so
minority, I call them.
yeah, and it's on the left and the right, I think.
Sure.
And I should have said too, like I am an independent now. I feel completely politically homeless. I voted for Donald Trump in 2024,
Ah, that was going to be one of my questions for you. Is
with the hope that he
did you
would.
shift over? My question was, did this push you to completely go the other way? And did you vote? How did you vote? If I was going to see if you would even tell me, but
No, yeah, I'm an open book on this. I one of the things that happened, when I woke up and I decided to write this book and found my own faith is I let go of fear. I do not care if you do not like me, and I don't mean you, but
good, good.
anyone.
No, we should be like that. Yeah.
But that is a very hard thing for someone on the left. It really is because it relies so much on being part of that group. It's so much a part of their identity. And then I would call them like sex, SECT
Yeah.
of the progressive cult. So
Right.
you have the race sect and you have the gender sect and you have, all these different sects, but um, they don't want to be excommunicated. They don't want to be different. So you see the virtual signaling of the Ukrainian flag in the bio or the picture with the mask or
Yep.
see, I'm one of you, I'm good. So I get my validity from you. And that used to be me. So I don't like to be too, harsh about it, but it's just a reality that I see. Basically, I can't ever see myself voting for a Democrat
Yeah.
in the near future unless they do a 180 on free speech and a 180 on a lot of things.
But it's getting
Because
further and further extreme. I mean, you get
it is.
AOC. I saw was trying to possibly make a. I'm like, are you, really? A guy like Bernie, who used to be extreme, and now he's, But Mamdani, Newsom out there. I mean, they're doubling down on. They just keep digging. I feel like as somebody who used to be kind of in that middle and was kind of just wanting a good candidate either way. And then now I just can't align with it. I know the right has its problems, but my goodness, all of these things that you're talking about so far today are all the things. If you went back, and I'm just shamelessly plugging myself, I guess, but if you go back and you listen to a lot of the things that I've been talking about over these last few months, I did a whole thing on cancel culture, a thing, all these things, and it's just lefty extremists methodology. It's this game plan that they have. It's hate, 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 and how dare everything Donald Trump. I mean, that's the joke, is that he could do this and then it'd be his fault. And the protests. Oh, please, please, Gaza. We've got to stop it. And then he does, and then it's like, okay, what's the next thing now that we can yell about? And it's this. Now I've seen it as kind of an observer. And that's why it's so interesting to hear from you as somebody who like went through it and kind of was on that side of things. And did things like Antifa and all these things, were you ever like, I don't want to align with this, like this is not who I am?
Well, I mean, I woke up in 2020, so it was before George Floyd, it was before, all of that. But there were
It was
things where
Antifa, right? Still kind of that whole thing, or not really?
I think it mostly really started to rear its ugly
After
head with
Floyd, right?
George Floyd.
Yeah.
Yeah, the summer of love, as they call it,
Yeah.
the
Right.
the mostly peaceful protests that did $2 billion worth of damage
Yeah.
and
Nothing to see
all of
here. In
that.
the background, there's flames everywhere.
Yeah, but there were a few things that I just didn't buy into the whole time that I think kind of kept me a little bit from going over the deep end. And maybe in part because all the identity politics they were pushing, I
Right.
wasn't a part of. I'm not a black person. I'm not gay. I'm not, so it didn't, the thing is that fear, going back to something we were talking about, is the way they get people. And a lot of that is through the identity politics. A lot of
Sure.
that is, oh, if you're trans or you love someone who's trans, then those nasty Republicans are going to genocide you. If you're black, despite the fact that uh, the biggest enemies of, in my opinion, of the black culture in our country are Democrats. And I detail a little bit of that in the
In the
book,
book.
but they, if the Republicans get elected, they're going to do X, Y, or Z to you, and so that didn't work on me. And I always sort of had a problem with where my party was on immigration, to be honest. And then it just became so blatant. My family immigrated from Eastern Europe on both sides in the early 1900s. So
Okay.
I'm second
You're a newbie,
generation.
relatively.
Yeah. So I'm not anti-immigrant, but also I am very much about assimilation and the melting pot.
Thank you. There you
And
go.
that if you are coming here and you do not believe in the values of our country, you should not be here. Not that I have anything against you because of your race, your color, or anything, but societies that do not share basic values fall.
Of
There's just
course.
no ifs, ands, or buts
And
about
you're
that.
seeing it now. That's what we're seeing.
Yeah, that is what we're seeing.
Yeah.
A house divided does not stand. And I don't consider myself a Republican. I don't consider myself a Democrat. And I think that there's a very large percentage of people who find themselves where we are. It's um, neither party speaks to us. And quite frankly, the parties are way too powerful. Our
Mm,
founders warned us about this.
yeah.
They called them factions, and we now have them, and they are ripping us apart. And it's a purposeful divide and conquer strategy, keep us fighting each other over things that don't matter while they, drain the treasury, do horrible things in our name across the planet, and really don't do much to actually address the concerns of American citizens.
It just
So,
feels like two teams. It feels like I'm supposed to be over here or over here. And if I, which I've done now, is just I'm getting away from the extreme left. Does that make it means all of a sudden I found myself over here where I'm a MAGA or I'm this and that, and I've fallen prey to the other side of it, which is I'm so frustrated with the division and what I do. I do think that the extreme left is the bigger role in that, starting with Obama. That I found myself now, aligning with things maybe on the right that I usually am more moderate with, um, and like you just said about immigration, that's a perfect example. Uh, Look, why can't we be okay with immigration? However, this, and this need to be applied. You can't just oh, and if you challenge if you said what you just said, which is they need to assimilate, they need to do these things, all of a sudden you're the buzzwords, you're all of these things now, and that's just not the way. There's no middle
well,
anymore.
no, well, there is no space in the middle, I mean, I think that there are two things that I say to people now, about like my sort of buzz phrases for after my wake up, and that is question everything,
Right.
especially your own beliefs and why you have them,
Yeah.
and follow the money.
Yeah, I read that as well in your stuff. Follow the money.
Yeah. Follow the money, and it's very illuminating when you follow the
Mm,
money. It's very illuminating, and but the question everything, I think that's what is that people on the left no longer question anything, especially not the beliefs that they have, because they have been indoctrinated through school to have them. They have been told that only uneducated rubes believe anything different,
right.
and they're certainly not one of those, right? So they have to, like, and then you have the social media and the media echo chamber, and then the fact checkers who are all left leaning, by the
Thank
way.
you. I was going to ask you about fact checking. Go ahead on that because I people say, "Oh,
Yeah,
it's
just
fact checked," and I'm like, "Yeah, it was fact checked by who?" And
follow the money.
yeah, follow.
It's
There you
all
go.
left
There
leaning
you. I'm going to use your
nonprofits
buzzword
that,
from here on
yeah,
out. I'm going to use
follow the money.
your
And
buzz
when I say
phrase.
follow the money, it has three pieces to it. Who paid for it? Who
Hmm.
benefited from it? And where did it go? If you start doing that with all of these things, you'll find some really interesting answers.
I did
But
that
what
with
I,
the protests,
oh
and
yeah,
you follow the money with a lot of the protests, and I found a lot of stuff. But anyway, I didn't mean to go ahead. I didn't interrupt
no,
you.
and I think that's true. I've begun to question if there have been any organic protests in the last 20 years that weren't funded, and I've noticed that they kind of have lost their va-va-va-voom since they cut off USAID AID funding.
Hmm, interesting. I might have to go
Interesting.
readdress that.
Yeah, to take a look at that. But what I was gonna say about the isms and the phobia calling and all of that
Oh
is
yeah,
that
the ists.
um you are the isms.
Is
You're a
yeah, the isms and
ist,
the
you're a
ists.
racist, you're a
That's right.
whatever, you're
Sexists.
transphobic. Ist phobia. I just always laugh at the phobia. It's like, no, nobody's afraid of y'all. Maybe you wish we were, but that ain't
Yeah.
what is going on. But anyway, I digress. I just the so there's 2 points I want to make about it. When your policy ideas don't work, fear is all you have.
Yes.
So, you know, they use fear, and what has happened is most of the people on the left are extremely compassionate. Might not seem like it when they're hurling the isms and the phobias at you, but what they have done is they have used brainwashing and indoctrination techniques to create selective compassion
Mhm.
so that people are only on the left are only allowed to be compassionate to people who are vulnerable who they have been taught are vulnerable, historically oppressed,
Marginalized
etc.
groups and all the
Marginalized
whole.
groups,
Mhm.
all of that stuff. So the only those people are worthy, deserving of their compassion. And what they have done is they have manipulated that compassion using fear and then weaponized it into anger. And so they are now feel 100% justified in being so angry at you
That's why they're good at
because you
anger.
don't care about that poor trans kid.
Right.
Okay. Now, what they also can't do is get below the talking points
Mm.
because they haven't examined their own beliefs at all. They don't have to because they constantly get confirmation bias and reaffirmation and repetition, which is one of the main indoctrination techniques.
I say they get a morning memo each day on what their talking points are. But
Oh yeah, this is the talking points, and this
yeah,
is the word you're supposed to use even
exactly.
today.
Word of the day. Buzzword of the day.
Yeah, I think it was his last State of the Union address. Biden's speech was fiery. That was the
Yes,
word
that
that
was yes.
everybody used,
You're right.
fiery.
Well, it's
So
so funny that you bring this up, and I swear, people, I didn't plan this at all. But when I was reading your stuff, reading your work, your book, this what you're talking about right now, I had highlighted right here in front of me, and it was the idea because as soon as you said the people on the left are the most compassionate, of course, immediately I was like, what? They're the hate, the burden, this, and then I went on. I continued on, and I can't agree with you more. I just feel like there are these people that feel like they have to protect other people. They have to the virtue signaling, this they have to, and then that stuff's being taken and it's being spun into hate and spun into fear, and that's why they're the loudest, the most violent, the most whatever. And it's such a perfect the way you put it was well done.
Well, thank
So
you.
I just
And
wanted to let you know I had that here. Here's I set here.
well, I see. I told you that we'd probably get to everything that you wanted to, like, maybe
Not
ask me,
everything, but we'll
but
get
not
there.
quite. But we still got some
A
time.
couple
But
minutes. I definitely, there are a few things I want to ask that are really basic because I like to do the quick questions for you. I wanted to know, and if you have something else, feel free to please continue. But real quick, has anybody sought you out from the old crew, from the old Democratic Party, and said, "Hey, what are you doing here? What's this book? What is this nonsense?"
no,
No.
no. I will say,
Do you think they're blinded to it all, or they just don't even
I don't
realize?
think
Or
they know. I mean, I will
no.
say that, like, um, I think I mentioned this maybe to you before we started recording. I have a love-hate relationship with technology, so I am not probably not using social media and everything else to the best effect to get the word out there. I think they'd all just think I lost my mind. I fell in love with this guy and he brainwashed me to
Brainwash you, yeah.
believe whatever. Although if they could have a conversation with me, it's obviously
There you
clear
go.
that I have not lost my mind, although I
No.
thought I was when I first started waking up, because I mean, only crazy or stupid people believe what I now believe, right? And
I'm
so,
fascinated with how intense I see people hate big bad orange man. I'm so fascinated to talk. That's why I'm so glad to talk to you, to see people, and not that all of a sudden you love Trump at all, but the fact that you're able to say, you know what, okay, this is not a game plan. This is not a strategy to just hate this guy. He won.
no,
He won. He's doing what he ran on for the most part. And and if we want to win, we need to come back and have our own strategy. And instead, their strategy is just hate Trump and everything we're doing. And they're on the 20% side of every 80-20 issue. And that's not going to get them anywhere. And I feel like they're fading. What do you think? Do you think the Democratic Party is fading, or do you think that's kind of just maybe just a little bit
I,
highlighted right now?
I'll be honest, I think both parties are. The
Good.
Democrats are really fading. I mean, I
So what's
don't
going
know
to happen?
what MAGA's going to
What's
do
going to happen?
after Trump is gone, and it's become really clear as we see what's happened to Marjorie Taylor Greene in the
Mm,
past couple weeks, that the establishment is not going to let anybody survive who is out of line, you know. And right now you have Trump leading MAGA, but when he's gone, I honestly don't know.
he's not.
I
You don't think he's priming JD Vance? They're not molding this guy to continue on the MAGA movement, if you will.
I don't have my pulse or my finger on the pulse of MAGA about this, because I've kind of pulled back from MAGA a little bit because I see a lot of cult-like behavior now going on there too. Not everybody,
Right.
but I think that I have a lot of questions about a lot of the things that President Trump is doing, and if you raise them with a lot of the MAGA crowd, he can do no wrong, and that
Right.
is not any better than the cult on the left,
Yeah.
where authority is always right, and you have to worship authority and idolize the expert. And so I'm not sure. I know I've heard a lot of people who are huge Trump supporters raise a lot of questions about Peter Thiel, raise a lot of questions about JD Vance's connection to him. And I am not on board with ushering in the technocratic oligarchic rule of this country. And I know a lot of people are asking questions about that. So, and there's just something I think about JD Vance that puts a lot of people off that I know of. So he
That's
doesn't,
interesting. I haven't talked to a lot of people about JD. That's what I'm saying. I'm not interesting because I think otherwise. Just I mean, I like the guy. I mean, like I said, just for different reasons. This is probably the next conversation about the future. You make a good point. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen when Donald Trump's gone, and but the Democrats are so far behind, and can Gavin Newsom really win it? And I mean, it's crazy. And so part of what I was going to get to was the future, but let's circle back. What's that? What was her name that always said circle back?
Jen
Press secretary.
Jen Psaki.
Yeah, and we'll let's circle back here to your book. I mean, let's really focus on the book. That's why we connected. And again, admittedly, I've read as much as I could until we had our talk, and I'm going to keep going with it. And it is really good.
No, thank you. I
I
appreciate
enjoy
that.
it, and I again, it's fascinating because I feel like one of the ways you set it up, and I'll set it up the same way, is that people can believe all, they can have their opinions about everything right now and what's going on, and you can still put yourself in your shoes. If you are like if you're like me, who's kind of gravitated towards MAGA mostly because of the insane behavior on the left, in my opinion, I can relate to it. Okay, wow, she's seeing these things through this. And I feel like anybody can read it. Some people might get, butthurt by it if they're true, still staunch Democrats, but I love that part of it, and again, I look forward to continuing through it. And I just wanted to know. I mean, you could have walked away. I mean, I know this is a very basic question because the obvious answer is you want to spread your word, but you could have walked away from this and gone. From my understanding, your relationship and in a nice fresh air, and you could get away from it all, but instead you chose to dive almost in a way deeper, researching, writing a book, putting yourself out there to where people, like I said, could maybe find you. Why did you choose to do that? Like, what was the incentive? What moment did you go, I'm doing a book?
So after I woke up, I went through a lot of emotions, and then I got really, really angry. I got angry that this had been done to me, that I had been indoctrinated and brainwashed, and essentially my life choices taken away from me in many ways because of that indoctrination and brainwashing. And I also recognized, like, we literally had an administration try to open a ministry of truth. They canceled it. Nina Jankowicz, I don't remember what they were calling it. It was like the Disinformation Bureau or something like that.
Yeah, I forget. I remember. I
I
know what you're
forget the
talking about.
title, but yeah, so I felt like we were really, really close to losing our republic because I've always thought there were three amendments that kept us free, really, in the Bill of Rights: the first, the second, and the fourth. And for many people, you may not be that familiar with the fourth because it doesn't exist anymore, really. It's the right to be safe in your person, property, and effects from unreasonable searches and seizures from the
Right.
government without a warrant issued by a judge or magistrate upon probable cause. Well, they started gutting that with the war on drugs. They started making exceptions to the warrant requirement the Supreme Court did.
Mhm.
And then when 9/11 happened and the Patriot Act passed, they gutted it even more. And that's what Edward Snowden told us about. They're looking at all your information. Like, it should apply to our digital property as well. And we have no digital privacy. We have no digital privacy from the companies that, we click yes on the terms without reading them. But the government is using that in order to completely avoid the Fourth Amendment. And I use this as an example because it's very clear. We are searched without a warrant every time we go on a flight.
It's true.
The TSA is unconstitutional to me. You cannot require someone without probable cause to open up your bag and show me everything you have. But it got us used to not worrying about our Fourth Amendment rights. And then most young people who were born, who are younger, who have been alive in the digital age only, they don't have any expectation of privacy. And in fact, they do the opposite. They want everybody in the world to know everything they're doing.
Yeah.
As long as it paints them in a positive light, or they can come and have a tantrum. It's one or the other. Either, oh, look at how great my life is, or, oh my God, look at how terrible my
I
life
bet
is.
most of them would be willing to give up their Fourth Amendment right. They'd be like, "That's not important. I'd rather this. I'd rather this, and this."
I'd rather be
Yeah.
safe.
Yeah,
Yeah,
be safe.
is a big
And I'm
one.
not lying. Maybe on the plane thing, I'm willing to talk about it, but I haven't really thought about it in that way that you
But so
bring
our
up.
Fourth Amendment literally doesn't exist so anymore. And
Yeah.
they've been trying to chip away, and some states are making some progress, I think, on the second. But really what keeps us free is that we have a free mind and we have the ability to speak about things when they go wrong, and that's the First Amendment. And so when I really saw the threat to these fundamental rights that the Democrat Party was
Mm,
posing, I said, I can't not say anything. I
right.
have to do
Yeah.
something. But I think I recall a moment where, I really had to struggle with the fact that my life was controlled by fear up until 2020. My
Mm.
entire life. Most of the decisions I made were about security, safety, comfort.
And you think that's definitely being applied today to this point on the from the Democratic side?
Oh, totally, 100%.
I'm
I
just making sure
mean,
we emphasize that.
yeah, 100%. It's all fear-based. And you know, exploring my own faith and getting a connection to the creator. I recall a day where I said, I'm done. And I screamed it out on my farm to nobody, to the air. I'm done being afraid. You're
Mm.
not getting my fear anymore. And then I said, okay, no more fear. I have to speak up because I feel like if at the time when I started writing this, I was expecting a second Biden term. It was way before the substitution, the democracy substitution that we
Oh
had
yeah,
at the last minute.
very democratic.
Yeah, very democratic, but um, and she wouldn't have been better. In fact, she'd have been worse, I think, on this and many things.
I think both sides should be able to agree on that, but they won't.
No, they never will. We're just racist and
Yeah,
misogynistic because we wouldn't vote for a
that's
black
right.
woman. Even though I voted for the black woman to be my governor, but she was a Republican, so you don't hear anything about that, and she didn't
Oh, that's
win.
the other thing I was going to ask you about. But we again, so much to talk to you about. We'll definitely, I'll definitely have to have you back on for sure. But
Yeah,
go
but
ahead, keep
so
going.
that's the point is I let go of the fear. I was like, I have to do something to help save the country that I love. And I knew that if we had another 4 years of Democrats, it would be lost, and so I rushed really to get the book out, and I spent a lot of time going around talking to people, mostly to try to help people help someone they know wake up.
Right.
Um, Most of the people who are still in the cult, who are still strong Democrats, I think they have a hard time hearing my message. Although I have heard other people who are Democrats but not way out on the fringe say, I kind of feel that way, but I don't feel like I can speak up.
Right. That's
And so
that was
maybe they'd be
what.
open to it, and maybe my book could give them some, help and support, and for them to understand, because another reason I wrote it is so that people who are waking up know they're not alone. It's a
Yeah.
really, like, I still don't feel like I fit anywhere,
Yeah.
and that I think is a really scary place sometimes to put yourself because we are communal we want connection, we want a community. And it's hard when you sort of give up what you had as your
Yeah.
community for a very long time, and try to find a new one, especially in a time where, as we were talking about before, like there's so much less in-person opportunity to have community
Mhm.
in the way that we used to.
So people
So
latch onto that. They latch onto it for sure.
yeah,
Any way they can,
so
and if the Democratic Party is their safe spot, they're going to stay with them.
yeah, so that's what really, was the moment I decided to write the book. And then, I wrote it. And now what I realize, and I understand it, but a lot of people don't read very books much anymore.
No.
So I'm trying to, I'm doing my best to think of ways I can get this message out. And I love having conversations like this. I hate sitting in front of a camera talking to the camera. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like it's
Yeah.
just,
Like I
and
do most of my stuff. I didn't like it, and I'm getting used to it because, as you can tell, I can talk too. We both can talk, uh, but I go ahead. You're saying that
so
you enjoy these
yeah.
conversations. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm just trying to, figure out other ways that I can help get the message out, and my biggest thing is, and I think I put this in an email to you, that like I really want us to get back to a point that people who have difference of opinion, even if they're very big differences of opinion, can talk to one another in a respectful manner that, doesn't assume the person is morally inferior because
Sure.
they think differently.
Yeah.
And remind us of those things we have in common and how we can, how we can start looking at each other as humans again, as opposed to
Yeah.
a member of a different tribe, essentially. And so that's part of, the goal now for me.
I mean, you referenced a lot of, Orwell, and my favorite book is Brave New World, Huxley and all that, and you reference that, and then you think about like the time machine, when they went out, and then the two human species had like completely divided off, and I think about that all the time. Like, what's this going to be like, in 50 years? What's going to be like in 200 years? And are we going to still be? Are we going to know the United States is what we know it as? But I know you're pressed on time, and I wanted to just ask you, if not because it's recent and it's was the biggest event that happened, how did you feel as a former Democrat, somebody who understands the indoctrination, at the reaction to Charlie Kirk's death? How do you feel when you watched people celebrate it? When you watched people like joke and it was it something where you're like, I made the right decision? Did it like solidify that, or were you just like not surprised at all? I had to ask you about Charlie.
I know, and I get it. And, the reaction was, quite frankly, very horrific and saddening to me,
Mhm.
but not surprising.
Not
I
surprised.
made the right choice. And I understand where that comes from based on where they are. And I think, this is the part that is really, really challenging with those, I think, waking those people up who are still indoctrinated and on the left. And that is that they've gotten to a place where they believe that speech in and of itself is violence.
Mhm.
That if you say something mean, you are committing a violent act against an individual. And, that is completely inconsistent with the First Amendment of our Constitution. And I respect, I defend their right to say what they said. I believe that that's constitutional
Yeah.
speech, but it is very much, we have to get back to a place where we don't other people based on their beliefs in a way that allows horrific acts to be um, committed. And it is somewhat chilling to me because I obviously have nowhere near the reach that Charlie Kirk did, and I didn't know him personally, but I'm kind of trying to do the same thing that he did,
Yeah.
and that is to have conversations with whoever will have them so that, truth can see the light. And again, just like with President Trump, they took sound bites out of context and they spun who he was
Yeah.
and what he was saying. You know, I never, I've watched a lot of his speeches since he was assassinated,
Mhm.
and he never was disrespectful. He always wanted, like, even if he was like talking to someone who was trans, and he completely disagreed with the whole thing. He thought it was social contagion, and it was against God and all those things. He always ended with a prayer for that person to be happy, to accept themselves, whatever it was. And so, I do worry about that in that way. And I'm really glad I'm out of it, and I don't have
Mhm.
to, and I'm not afraid of the pressure, I don't care. They can't affect me. Whatever they say about me, I don't care anymore. And, I would pray for them to love themselves too. That's sort of where it all comes from. I think you know, is doing that. But I wanted to highlight something else as you talked about, the time machine and the two sets of
Mhm.
humans.
Mhm.
I think that we, based on the social media and media and community ecosystems people live in, we literally live in different realities now. And it's only going to get worse. We didn't even get to that at all, but
I know. Yeah.
where is that taking us? I think that we use different terms for things. We are starting to have different languages almost. And so I feel like it's important that we continue to have these conversations, and, start from a place of love and kindness and compassion. And what I was going to say before, when they get to the isms, when they get to the phobia and they start throwing it at you, it is often because you've pushed them into a corner and they can't get out of it. And even though you're not a threat to their literal physical survival, you are a threat to the survival of the delusion that they live in. And you have activated the reptilian survival brain in the brainstem that is in pushing them into fight or flight, and they are pushing at you as much as they can to get you away, because their subconscious knows that if they admit what you are saying is true, the entire house of cards could fall.
Yeah.
You would be pulling on the sweater and all it would come completely undone, because that's what happened to me. And I used to react pretty strongly at Jamie when he would push me into these corners until I finally couldn't anymore. And so that, or you should know that when they get to that point, you're getting through, but you're not going to ever get them to admit, hey, you're right, or hey, I'll look into that. Not in that conversation, most likely, but you may have planted a seed that may lay dormant for a while, but then at some point may germinate and then bloom into a free mind again. So, I mean, that I think is the important thing to remember. The other thing, just quickly from the book that I'll say, and then I really do have to wrap up.
Yeah, we can.
Get to my next thing, but try to access the true compassion that that person has, knowing that the compassion has been manipulated and weaponized and all of those things. But, like you say, try to get them back away from the selective compassion. And what about those 95% of girls? What about, or those kind of things? And finally, ask questions. Don't try to tell them anything, because if you're not the expert or what you're saying is contradicting the expert, you're going to dismiss it out of hand. But if you can ask them questions, for the trans issue, I always ask, hey, I'm really interested. Can you tell me what studies you rely on that show that it improves outcomes for youth?
Yeah, and they don't like that either.
But
sometimes they don't.
Sometimes, but at least you're trying to be sciencey, right?
Yes.
And you're respecting their view and wanting to know where they come from. And again, they might react and say, "Well, you're just transphobic because you don't believe that." But then they might go to their computer and go, "Hey, I really should know this." So it's not about. And again, don't take it personally, and wear it as badge of honor and all those things. And just try to be, and this was the word that often gets people when I talk to them, try to be patient.
Patient. And I've had to work. Oh my gosh, Lisa, that's probably the best thing to end on, is because I've doing what I've been doing here for not that long. I mean, at first I was just combatant, and you just can't do that. I mean, I was, on social media all day, like firing away at people, and you just can't. I mean, it's pointless. I mean, firstly, it's not going to do anything. And so I appreciate you saying what you did there. Again, I had so many more things, but let me plug the book again for sure. And because I've got most of my people are, like-minded to us. But I do have some that I talk to every once in a while that come on and they're not. And then you've got people that are also worried about friends and family that may be going through this. So, I put up a bunch of reels. I put up a bunch of things, but is it Amazon primarily, or is it your website? You want to go and plug that real quick for me?
My website is deprogrammingdemocrats.com.
Deprogrammingdemocrats.com. Okay.
But Amazon is probably primarily where people buy the book. Barnes and Noble as well. It's available there. And I don't have a preference, wherever it works best for you to buy your books.
Amazon was very simple, and it came right up, and it was there. But again, Deprogramming Democrats and Uneducating the Elites. Write it down. Go get it. Look at all my stuff, and you can always message me, everybody, if you want the link for some reason. If you can't find it on Amazon, let me know. But I don't know how to end this. I have so much more we can talk about. So hopefully we can do this again. So
Certainly, we'll find it. We'll find a time to do it again. And the way I always like to end it, Ryan, is with some optimistic hope. Because I see a lot of people waking up. I do. And I see the thing with Charlie woke a lot of Democrats up. And I see more and more Democrats waking up when they see the way the media or the government is framing something and it's inconsistent with their own
the BBC the
experience.
Other day. It's a little different.
Yeah.
But,
And so I don't think we're that far away from getting to a point where enough people are awake that we can start demanding some accountability from our elected representatives again.
I agree. I think we're
and I think
close to
we're
that.
pretty close.
And I think that this kind of conversation, and I'm seeing this kind of conversation a lot more now, happening all over the place. Some larger scales than ours, but some lower scales than ours, and hopefully we can just continue to grow together as a team. So, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I know you got to run and keep spreading the word. So,
will do. You too.
I can't wait to talk to you again. So, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
All right, thanks, guys. Love you all. Bye.
All you gotta do is just listen up.